Welcome back, GRD132, to part 2 of our logo recreation exercise, and we're working on the children's place, and I was kind of deciding between Crimson Text and Quattrocento, and I'm using Quattrocento, and what I want to do is match it up. So what I'm going to do is lay it over on top right now, and you could change the color if you need to, but I'm going to get it to the size up and down, the vertical size that I can first, and then I'll worry about spreading it out. And I'll go down here and click on Auto Scale Font. And remember, you don't have to hold Shift. You just have to kind of move in here. And I just want to keep going down until I get it to the right size. Now, you could mess around with the point size as well. I'm just doing it manually here. And I'll even zoom in more to make sure I have it pretty good, because a little bit will matter here. See, it's a little bit too short. Now, let me see if I could go here and just go down a little bit in size. It's at 49. Let me go down to 46 and see what happens. And that's pretty close. Maybe it's 47. And that's about right. Now I'm just looking at the height, so that's why I did that. So that looks good for the height, even though the image I'm looking at isn't perfect. Now I want to spread these out, so I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And you don't just want to stretch on this. What you want to do is track it. And for tracking, we use the character spacing. And I'm going to start with like 0.0 something. Don't ever just do 0.5 or something. Do 0.0. I'll do 0.03 and start there. It's not a lot. Actually, I'm going to go 0.02 because it's not going to be a lot. And that's not enough. So I'll double click in here and do 0.0. I'll double it, 0.04, and see how that works. Now, I'm not seeing the whole thing. I should zoom out a little bit more because I'm missing the S here. So let me hit Auto. Now I'm missing the S. And now I need to go a lot more, so I'm going to go 0.08, see how that works. And I'm getting there, and I could have started with 0.1. Let me try 0.15, see what happens. That's way too much. 0.11, and that's pretty good. I'm going to zoom in and look at the characters, because, again, the characters aren't lined up perfectly. So let me zoom in here and see where we're at. There's the T, there's the H, so they're kind of off. And again, this was on a plastic bag. And the kerning is going to be off a little bit, but I'm looking at kind of the width of letters and things like that. This isn't going to be perfect, but I think I'm going to not put any more space because it looks like we may have more space in here than some of these. And maybe they have more space in between the words themselves. But again, we're just going to try to match this as best we can. And I'll try 0.105. And that spreads it out. And let's try 0.106. 0.106. And that's pretty good. I'm going to leave it there. I know it doesn't match exactly, but I think that's the best we're going to do right now. Now let me move it up here and just see how it looks. That's not too bad. Again, we're matching it on a bag, but there's still some areas here where I think it's even kind of kerned a little off. But I'm going to stay with that right now. And it's hard to tell, the thickness of the letters. Some of these letters look wider. Some of them look narrower. Like the E's here look wider, but the S's look narrower. So that could just be the font, but I'm going to let it go for now and just work on this one. And I'll put the P up here. And I'll do the same thing. I'll get the size correct. So I'll go down here, make sure Auto Scale Font is on, and just scale it as close as I can. And kind of nudge it up there. And now that I have a point size, I'm going to just type in a couple numbers here. 150. That's not too bad. It looks like a little more than that. 152. And maybe 153. And I'm going to put on Auto, so I see all my letters. Now, we can track this out a little bit. Let me kind of move down here. And you could even put it in a different color if it's hard to see. If you want to just put it in red or something, maybe that will make it appear from the background a little bit differently. So we do have an issue with the A here. It's not a pointy A. We could fix that, but we do want to get these things in place. So I'm going to move the P in place there. Now, the problem is some of these are wider than they are. There's more space here between the P and L. Like we actually have to pull that together a little bit. Some of these letters aren't quite right. Even though I had the P right, the C looks a little off. So I'm going to go a little bigger here and try 155 and try to get the C correct. And it went to 12. Let me change that, 155. And that looks, the C looks a little better. I think the C can even be a little better. So I'm going to judge it by the C and not worry about the P, because something could have been folded there. So I'll go to 156. It's getting there, even more, maybe 158, and it went to 12. I have no idea why it does that yet, unless I move my mouse or something. So that C looks pretty good. It's getting there. The letters aren't perfect, so we can track it out a little bit, although we're going to have some issues because we're going to have to track this in. So let me just nudge this up. So that's okay. And the C even looks a little wider. So, I mean, you could even change some of these letters and stretch them. Now, you can't stretch out an individual letter. We'd have to, put them separately and break them up and put them separately. And we're going to try not to do that right now. And that's going to be a little bit of a problem because once we line everything up, the C being so narrow in there could be a problem. But we're going to do the best we can, so maybe I'll just make it a little bit bigger. I'll try 160. And it went to 12 again. So I'll put 160 again. And that went to 7. So I'll put 160 and hold my cursor there. And that seems to be the secret, keeping the cursor there. So everything looks okay. I mean, they still look good here. Now, you can see we have some issues. So I'm going to move this down. Now, the letters that we have, see the P looks narrower. This L looks about the same. The A looks about the same. The C looks wider. So, what you could do, and maybe we almost have to do this here. I wasn't planning to do this, but let's move this down here and let's convert it to paths. So I'm going to go here and use this thing. Can we ungroup it? Let's check out our layers. Let's go into View, Layers panel, and we have text here. This is called Compound Path. Now, we need to kind of break this up a little bit. We can't go inside here. Let's see if we can. We can't put it into a path. We can't ungroup it, but we want to get this stuff apart. So let's go to Modify. And it has Path. Let's try Split Path. I'm not sure. I don't think I've used this one for a while. Let's try Split Path. Does that work? I just want to make sure I can get these letters separate. Now they are. Now, here's the problem. They're separate. You can see they're separate. And again, let me undo that just so you see what I did. It's a compound path, and I went to Modify, Path, Split Path, which takes it away from being a compound path. Now, what it did is any individual paths that are compound paths, it took them from being that. So what you'd have to do is just highlight this, and I think you can just do subtract. Let's see if that works. That'll work. That it kind of makes it into a compound path. So I'm highlighting the A, and I'm doing subtract. Okay, so now what I have is these basically 5 separate shapes. They're no longer a font. So I'm going to move this up here, and what that allows me to do is select this one and squash it a little bit. Move this one over. I'm just going to do this. Now, I meant to do tracking and kerning and stuff on here, but it turns out I'm not. So I'm going to stretch this out slightly. Now, the problem with stretching it out is it makes the body of the font stretched out. So really what you'd want to do, if you could, if you can actually get into this thing, if you can get into your sub-select tool and zoom in, way in. Now, this is a lot of work just for this one. This was going to be the practice. And highlight these things here and just highlight those anchor points. And I'm just using my arrow key and pushing them out. That way I'm not stretching out the thickness of the letter at all. And you can see this isn't perfect, and if we want to make it perfect, we could, mess with all the anchor points. But I'm just going to stretch that out without stretching out the font itself and just leave that alone. So I used my sub-select tool to highlight those anchor points, nudge them over with my arrow. And again, I wasn't planning to do all that, but hey, why not? All right, the A looks pretty good. The C looks like it can be stretched out. So I'm going to go back here to my pointer and take this C and kind of just stretch it out a little bit. Bring it over here and even stretch it down. And this curls up, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. We don't have to get into all that. Now, if we wanted a pointy thing here, actually this one, let's see what's in here. Sometimes when you break these apart, there's all kinds of anchor points in here. So let's see what we have. If there's a whole bunch, you might think, well, it's just a point, but you could go up here and just do something like that. Now it's going to mess up. We'd almost have to make it like really tall a little bit. I'm just going to kind of break the difference. I'll just do that. Let's see, because it's hard to see what this one what the original one was like. It was just on a point. I guess we could go here and add a point. I don't want to get into all that. See, I didn't want to do all that right now. We're just going to get it close. But if we did have to go in there, I guess I could kind of pull this in a little and just kind of fudge it a little, even though the top's rounded a little, so I can round the top a little and maybe pull that in slightly. You know, you could do something like that. Now that's not perfect, and again, that was not my intent to get in and doing all that, but from far away it looks okay. And the E, now that I have a separate E here, I'm going to nudge it over. Now this is where we would be doing tracking, but we're not. We're just kind of moving it, and I'm just going to stretch it out a little bit. And that's pretty good. That's close enough. I'm going to hide this over here, my layers panel, and maybe I'll make this red so it's easier to see. And then I'm going to nudge this down. Now you can see we have issues with letters here, but I'm just going to nudge this down. If you hold shift while you're nudging down with your arrow, it'll get a little closer. Now this is kind of off because all the letters are kind of off, but again, it's on the bag. So what you can do here is just, now that you have this, I'm going to highlight all this stuff and just group it. Now remember, when you group it, then you have to hover over things to get inside, but I'm just going to group it right now so it all moves, and I'm just going to move it down here, and that doesn't look too bad. If you click once and then click again, now that'll be on that. Now if you want the color, you can take the eyedropper and try to match the color as best you can. And now if you want this one in that color, and hold shift, shift, shift click, shift click. If you want them all in that color, here's a little trick. When you go to fill down here, now it's saying fill because it's not a font. That's why it's saying fill, and it's not giving us the font thing. If I go here and you go to in use, look at that. You can use that one. So that means we're done. So we're pretty much done with this. And we matched it as good as we could. Now, if you could even try it, if you want to try it with Crimson Text, you could try the same thing with Crimson Text. I did it with Crimson Text, and I just did some, kerning here. I didn't have to turn it into outlines and do all that, but the P was different. The P was a little bit different, and this is still a little different, and this C is a little different. I mean, you could go in here and drag some of this stuff around. I'm not worried about that right now. This is just kind of practice, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but it should look pretty close. I mean, if you looked at this, you would say, oh, this is a Children's Place logo to the average person. Now, if I came in here and studied it, I might find some things, but the A looks pretty good. The C looks pretty good, I think, based on it being on a bag and not being real straight to begin with. And the E and the L looks pretty good. It's a little sharper here, but it's pretty close. So that's what we're going for right now. We're just looking to be very observant and getting as close as we can with the fonts that we have available to us. So that's the end of part 2 of this one. Now for the next one, we're going to work on the Shelby, and we'll see how we do with that one. So that's the end of part 2 of logo, whatever this is called. What is this called? Type logo. It's called Type Logo Recreation. And that's the end of part 2. For part 3, we're going to work on the Shelby, and hopefully that won't take 2 videos to do that one.